Who was Marco Polo? Chapter 4. The Great Kublai Khan. A few days later, the Polos arrived at the palace in Chengdu. After 3.5 years of traveling, Marco finally met Kublai Khan. Marco wrote that there was great rejoicing at the court because of their arrival. They met with attention and honor from everybody. The Khan was happy about the Pope's letters and gifts. He was glad to see the Polos and wasn't angry that no priests had come with them. Marco was 21 years old at the time. The Khan was nearly 3 times his age. Marco said he had black eyes, pale skin, and was of medium height. He was very impressed by the Khan's riches and palaces. The Khan's summer palace at Chengdu was made of white marble. It was decorated with gold and surrounded by a 16-mile wall. Inside the walls, there were beautiful gardens where 10,000 white horses grazed. 10,000 horses? According to Marco, there were. Kublai rode his horse around the park, followed by another horse with a pet leopard on its back. During winter, the Khan lived in another palace. It was located just north of what is now Beijing, which is the capital of the People's Republic of China today. The Polos visited the Winter Palace, too. Its rooms were decorated with golden sculptures and paintings of dragons, beasts, knights, and birds. Its dining room was big enough for 6,000 guests. At least that's what Marco said. Other rooms contained rich treasures that no one but the Khan was allowed to see. Around the palace there was a beautiful park full of deer, gazelles, and other animals. Whenever Kublai saw an interesting tree somewhere in his empire, he had elephants drag it to this park so he could plant it there. Mile-long walls with guard towers on each corner surrounded this palace. The biggest gate in the wall would only open for the Khan himself to pass through. Every spring, Kublai went on a hunting trip. He didn't do any hunting himself. His servants hunted while he watched from a big tent. Marco said that there were 5,000 hunting dogs and 10,000 falconers. Falconers were men who carried falcons, large birds of prey, that attacked other animals when released. Kublai Khan did everything in a big way. Even his family was very big. He had 4 main wives and 47 sons. No one knows how many daughters he had. His favorite wife was named Shabi. She helped the Khan understand the customs of the people he ruled so he would be a better leader. Kublai had been ruler of the Mongol Empire for 15 years by the time Marco met him. There were other Khans in Asia, but Kublai was the boss of them all. Unlike most warriors, Kublai didn't try to force conquered people to change their religion. In fact, he did just the opposite. He told leaders of different religions that their religion was his favorite. That made them happy, so they didn't try to overthrow him. Kublai Khan studied the teachings of Jesus and Buddha. He hired Muslims to work in his government. He also respected rules of a Chinese philosopher named Confucius, who was born in 551 BC. Confucius taught that people should treat others as they'd like to be treated themselves. He also taught that everyone should be educated, not just rich people. This was a very unusual idea at the time. Kublai Khan's grandfather, Genghis, had already conquered northern China. In 1279, 4 years after the Polos arrived, Kublai conquered southern China. This was his biggest military victory. Kublai grew even richer by taxing the wealthy cities of southern China and his other new lands. Marco called him the most powerful of men in subjects, lands, and treasures that there is on earth. Even though Kublai had murdered many people and grabbed their land, Marco thought he was a fair ruler. When farmers had a bad harvest, they didn't have to pay taxes. Hungry people were fed for free with corn, wheat, rice, and other grains kept in storage. Marco wrote that Kublai Khan was the wisest man and the ablest in all respects, the best ruler of his subjects and of empire, and the man of the highest character of all that have ever been in the whole history of his people. Genghis Khan. 1162 to 1227. Genghis Khan was Kublai Khan's grandfather. He was one of the most skillful and feared military leaders ever. In 1206, he united Mongol nomads into an army. A year later, he led them on the first of many bloody invasions of surrounding villages. Within 50 years, his army had conquered 2/3 of Asia. His empire grew to include parts of Russia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and northern China. His wars were cruel and his laws were strict. He claimed any town he wanted for his own. Sometimes he stole its riches, then burned it down. People were scared he would kill them if they put up a fight. Some surrendered without a struggle. After his death, other Khans took over his conquered lands. Eventually, Kublai Khan became one of those rulers. Chapter 5. Marco works for the Khan. Kublai Khan liked Marco because he was smart and amusing. According to Marco, over the next 17 years, he was sent on missions to different areas of the Mongol Empire. Marco never said exactly what the Khan asked him to do on any of these missions, but he did say he always did a good job. It seems that part of his job was snooping around. After each mission, he gave the Khan a report of what he'd done and seen. These lively reports entertained Kublai. They were much more interesting than the dry facts reported back by the Khan's other men. Marco took notes as he traveled. He brought interesting stories from faraway lands back to Kublai's court. He wrote that he tried to gather knowledge of anything that would be likely to interest the Khan. It seemed that Marco had a bright future working for Kublai Khan. In his book, Marco's stories don't strike modern readers at all that entertaining, but people wrote in a much more formal style back then. One story Marco wrote about was the day he saw what he thought was a huge 15-foot-long snake. He said its legs each had 3 claws. Its jaws could swallow a person. This turned out to be a crocodile. Marco had never seen coal before. He was amazed to see people burning black rocks. The Mongols had one of the very first Pony Express systems for sending mail. Marco was impressed by how fast Kublai could send a message. There were 10,000 stations about 30 miles apart along the major roads throughout the Khan's lands. A messenger could rest at a station, get a new pony, and continue on carrying news. Foot messengers carried a rider's news from the stations to nearby villages. The Mongols had destroyed some cities that Marco visited. Many villagers in the region of Tibet had once been beautiful, but when Marco got there, the people were gone. Only tigers and other wild animals roamed the ruins, making it very dangerous. Marco saw paper money for the first time in China. Paper had been invented in China around 105 AD, more than 1,000 years before Marco's arrival. At first, pieces of old fishnet, rags, hemp, and grasses were used to make it. They were boiled until they turned mushy. Then they were flattened and dried. Later, paper was made from bark. Marco wrote that paper money was made from the bark of the mulberry tree, the leaves of which are the food of silkworms. The bigger the piece of paper money, the more it was worth. In most of Europe, people didn't know how to make paper during Marco's time. They didn't have paper money until the 1600s. Marco decided that paper money was better than the heavy coins used back home. Instead of paper, European books were handwritten on vellum or parchment. Those were made from the skin of animals such as sheep, calves, pigs, or goats. It was harder and more expensive to make than paper. The Chinese printed books and money by hand-pressing paper against ink-covered letters or pictures carved on blocks of pear tree wood. Wood block printing was faster than writing by hand, but it was still a slow way to make a book. In China, Marco was surprised by the loudest bang he'd ever heard. It was the sound of gunpowder exploding. Many centuries earlier, the Chinese had invented gunpowder, but Europeans didn't know about it. In the middle 1200s, an Englishman named Roger Bacon figured out how to make gunpowder, probably after studying a Chinese firecracker. The first known gun was made in China in 1288. Guns were used in Europe as early as 1314. Chinese printing. Designs were drawn on paper, then carved into wood blocks. Movable type was selected from a tray of clay characters and then was arranged in an iron frame and held in place by wax. The block or frame was then inked and pressed onto paper to make multiple prints.